The hottest news in African football this summer has just dropped. Mamelodi Sundowns coach, South African coach, Rhulani Mokwena has moved to Wydad Casablanca. And there are so many questions. We're going to talk about all of that and so much more on this episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. My name is Maher Mizahi. I'm your host, and as always, this podcast is brought to you by africasaCountry.com. Wow. Today we're going to talk about Rhulani Mokwena's big move to Wydad Casablanca. I think, if we said that this was going to happen about a month ago, nobody would have believed you. Everything happened so quickly. Around last week, I think, we heard news that Rhulani Mokwena was having serious disagreements with the hierarchy up in Mamelodi Sundowns, and that he was thinking about quitting his post. I don't think many of us took that seriously, just because he's done so well over there, right? 91 matches, 60 wins, 22 draws, and 9 losses, a record that he cited several times. Almost record runs, really, in the PSL, winning several trophies at a time, winning the African Football League, coming up just short in the CAF Champions League, but still, the manner in which Sundowns were playing football wasn't something that we had seen on the African continent, really, ever. And so you'd think, with such a young coach who seems to have such proximity to his players, there's no way that Mamelodi Sundowns would let him go. There's no way that he would want to go anywhere else. Why would you want to go anywhere else, especially on the African continent? But he did. He ends up tendering his resignation. And this is something that I still think hasn't really been forensically investigated, right? If you listen to the first layer of South African media, they're going to tell you that the reason why Rhulani Mokwena left Mamelodi Sundowns is that there was a clash between himself and the sporting director, the technical director, Flemmingberg, I believe, who's a Dutchman, and just some differences could not be resolved. Again, if you read between the lines of what's been said, of some of the interviews that Mokwena's done since then, you get the impression that he wanted a little bit more control, over some transfer signings, like maybe perhaps signing a striker, and that he wasn't really given some of that freedom to exercise his profession as he wanted. The counter argument could be that, Rhulani Mokwena had some say in some signings. For me, the biggest one that comes to mind is the signing of Tempenkosi Lorch, who, is not really like a sporting director signing. He's not a young player with no resale value. And that signing, I think most people would argue, didn't really work out. And so, the opposite would be, even when he wanted to sign players, it didn't really work out. So why would we give him that much control? So there seemed to be, again, if you listen to the first layer of South African media, there was just a simple clash between a sporting director or a technical director and a coach, which happens, I think, all the time in football. Ideally, those two are in sync. And when they're in sync, you tend to have good results at clubs as long as the two are competent. But it's not unheard of to hear of, a coach and a sporting director clashing. And that's why you have some coaches that, want almost, all decisions to go through them. Somebody like Arsene Wenger, for example. And you have other coaches that are absolutely fine not investing any time in scouting and worrying about transfers and any of that, and just focusing on the players. He'll outline, for example, or she'll outline a profile of a player that they want. They'll hand that profile to the sporting director, and they'll do their business and so on and so forth. As I continue to speak to South African journalists, however, and this is not unanimous, but some told me that perhaps this was just an excuse. Perhaps people in Sundowns at the club were a little sick of Mokwena, who they believe, tries to control things too much, could have an ego behind the scenes. And I don't like talking like this because, this is not information I heard from a first-hand source. And so as a journalist, you're always kind of careful when you're throwing, these allegations out. You don't want to be casting aspersions on somebody's character. But you do also hear that Mokwena could be sometimes difficult to deal with some of the club hierarchy. They were sick of him, and it wasn't just Flemmingberg, it was other people at the club. And even when he had an interview with Robert Marawa, and Robert Marawa, I think, rightfully asked him the question, did one person make this decision, or did one person push you out of the club? Mokwena, he asked him, I think, on multiple occasions, and Mokwena, I think, admitted that, no, I don't think it could be a one-person decision. So all of that to be said, let's take a quick, let's do a quick recap of Mokwena's time there. So we said, record runs in the PSL, great win to loss to draw ratio. The kind of football, though, that was played at Mamelodi Sundowns, I think is ultimately going to be Mokwena's legacy at Sundowns. It was not dissimilar watching a Mamelodi Sundowns side and watching a Manchester City or an Arsenal side, which is a crazy thing to say. I never thought we would be saying that, 5 years ago in the African continent. And I don't mean that Mamelodi Sundowns can go and beat Barcelona or can go and beat Arsenal or Manchester City. No, we're talking about the style of play, the tactics that are employed, things like inverted fullbacks, things like, sophisticated counter pressing, multiplying, the passing lines, great ball playing goalkeepers, modern tactics employed on the African continent. It was such a breath of fresh air. And that, I think, is going to be his major legacy. That's the reason why we're all talking about him. That's the reason why his move to Wydad Casablanca is such a trending topic. Not just in South Africa, not just in Morocco. All around the continent, people are talking about this move. It's because Rhulani Mokwena managed to capture our imagination. And I think he's always, always going to be remembered for that. And nobody can remove that from his legacy. But that's not all. We can also have, not a negative, but we can have questions that remain about Mokwena's time at Sundowns, because he himself will not deny that Mamelodi Sundowns have an absolutely huge budget and they can, buy some of the best players. And the expectation at Mamelodi Sundowns should be winning a CAF Champions League. And Rhulani Mokwena, during his time there, never managed to win a CAF Champions League. He won an African Football League, but not the CAF Champions League. And so I think he leaves with a few different questions. For me, there are really 3 or 4 outstanding questions for Mokwena at Wydad Casablanca. Number one, can he function at a club within a certain structure? Meaning, can he function with an imposing president of a club? Because the Motsepes are not really, I don't get the impression that they're imposing things at Mamelodi Sundowns, from proximity. They seem to be more like lingering at a distance. In North Africa, the club presidents, including Wydad's new club president, Hisham Eitman, are going to be very, very close, and they're going to be very imposing. So can he can he perform, or can he do a good job with an imposing club president, with a sporting or technical director? Can he function within that structure of, president, director, coach? Can he work within that hierarchy? Perhaps it wasn't the case at Sundowns. Can he do it at Wydad Casablanca? Just to show that maybe Sundowns was an outlier. Maybe it wasn't him that was the problem. That's question number one. Question number two, can he win the CAF Champions League? This is not a criticism of Mamelodi Sundowns, but last year he said at the press conference, I'm not obsessed with winning the CAF Champions League. And I spoke about this on a recent podcast episode. At a club like Wydad Casablanca, it's not the level of Al Ahly, but there's going to be real pressure to win the CAF Champions League. It's almost going to be an obsession. And so, is Rhulani Mokwena going to be able to win that big of a competition, employing the kind of football that he plays? He didn't manage to do it at Sundowns. Can he do it at Wydad Casablanca, where some of the intangibles are actually going to be in his favor? We talked about, for example, in Pretoria, not creating really that kind of intimidating atmosphere that's so crucial in the kind of two-way ties, the home-away legs that we have in the CAF Champions League. At the Stade Mohammed V Stadium in Casablanca, Rhulani Mokwena will enjoy that kind of atmosphere, that kind of support from the supporters, and I think that's going to be absolutely crucial for him. And number three, how does he deal with fan pressure? Again, Mamelodi Sundowns supporters, I think, had a great relationship with Rhulani Mokwena. But Wydad Casablanca is a club. I was just talking to a colleague of mine. He said, when's the last time they had a manager that lasted more than 2 years? And you have to go back a decade to John Toshak, 2014, I believe, until 2016. That was the last time a manager actually stayed at the club for more than 2 years. And it was 2 years and 2 months, I think. Rhulani Mokwena just signed a 2-year contract, I think, with an extra year as an option, which I think the club can trigger. Maybe even the manager can trigger. I'm not sure 100% of the details. Can he last the full 2 years? Because these clubs are very, very complicated. You need to be bulletproof in your mind to make it, because there's so much interference, there's so much pressure, the expectations are so high. These are the outstanding questions I have. Can he function within a structure? Can he win the CAF Champions League with the style of football that he employs? Can he deal with the fan pressure? I don't know. This is something that we're going to have to, monitor throughout the year. But I just wanted to, before we wrap up the episode, to touch up on, the status of Wydad Casablanca, Wydad Athletic Club of Casablanca, before he has a press conference this evening and before we really get to see him as a coach of the club. So, first of all, the first thing I would say is that I've been asking some of my colleagues, is this a good move or a bad move for Rhulani Mokwena? One of my colleagues said that this was a terrible move. He should have taken some time off, assessed his options, refreshed mentally, and maybe waited for a bigger club, maybe waited for another opportunity, not for a club that's in such limbo, in such flux. Because for those that don't know, and we're going to talk about it in a second, Wydad Casablanca had a horrible year by their standards. They finished 30 points behind the arch rivals Raja Casablanca in the Botola, in the league. They crashed out of the CAF Champions League early, I believe, to Simba, if I'm not mistaken. They crashed out of the African Football League. They did not win the cup in Morocco. This is going to be a reset season for them. Their president, Saïd Nassiri, was arrested and is embroiled in this huge scandal in Morocco, connected with drug money. And they just brought in a new president of the football section of the club. His name is Hicham Aitmenna, who's also kind of a politician. I believe he's an MP in the Moroccan parliament. And this is not uncommon, in North Africa to have MPs as club presidents. They tend to increase the popularity of the personality. But MPs tend to have, big egos. They tend to power trip. They tend to be populists, and almost suck up to the fans, and as a result, they're not the easiest people they're not necessarily football people. And I don't believe, when I ask Moroccans, they say Hicham Aitmenna is not too different from Saïd Nassiri. He's kind of like, he has a big ego and not very ambitious, perhaps, very populist, talks a big game. We'll definitely have a go and try and make sure that Wydad are successful, but may not be the easiest person to work with. But I had another South African colleague that told me, you know what, this might be a good idea for him. He needs to increase his emotional intelligence, and he thinks perhaps a move abroad, where he's not known as, from the Sono family in South Africa, as, South African football royalty, where he's not Rhulani Mokwena, the greatest coach in the world in South Africa. Maybe a move to Morocco here, and now all of a sudden he's in the lion's den, so to speak. Maybe this is going to do a lot of good for him and his emotional intelligence, and maybe this is what he needs to evolve another level. So we'll see. Like I said, Wydad are in flux at the moment. Last year was crazy. They had a lot of different coaches. They didn't really progress in the CAF Champions League. They have a new president. They got rid of a lot of their crucial players, a lot of their foreigners. So like the Libyan Hamdoul Houni, the winger, the two Algerians, the left back, Ilyas Chitti, the center midfielder, Zakaria Draoui, their longtime captain Yahya Jabran in midfield, their Moroccan winger Montassar Lahtimi, who is, I believe, on loan from Trabzonspor but didn't play enough matches with Wydad, so his automatic clause to be purchased by the club wasn't triggered. There's 6 or 7 important players of last season that are moving on, and this is one more thing that I think we're going to have to monitor with Rhulani at Wydad is how much say does he have now with the transfer. Some Moroccan journalists don't believe he'll have any because of the imposing figure of the new club president. Some say, yeah, he should. Look, he managed to impose himself by bringing on 5 staff members of his to Wydad Casablanca. So the fact that he managed to impose himself in negotiations there, they're certain that he's going to be able to impose himself in terms of transfer targets. And is that a good thing or a bad thing if he imposes himself in terms of transfer targets, right? Because you look at, again, Lorch, Zungu, Zuko, like none of those were outstanding signings at Sundowns. Is he going to be able to sign fantastic players for Wydad Casablanca? Should he even be able to do that, or should he just stick to his capacities as a coach? These are all the kinds of questions that are going through my head, and everything is still so fresh and disorganized. And that's why, like, I just wanted to get this episode out before he does his press conference. But I think ultimately what I take away from this move today is that, first of all, it's great for African football to have coaches from one extreme part of the continent go to another extreme part of the continent. And that kind of, interconnectedness that we have in African football. I love it. Absolutely fantastic. But ultimately, what I take away from today is that the fact that we all have so much interest in this move is a testament to Rhulani Mokwena and the fact that he's managed to capture our attention. In a perfect scenario, he'll be able to turn the club around in 1 year, help them qualify to the CAF Champions League, put in a bunch of great new signings, stabilize the club, and then next year win the CAF Champions League. I mean, that's tough, right? In 2 years, a very ambitious roadmap, but that's the kind of coach he is. That's the kind of expectations we have of him. But this could also go the other way. He could find himself at a club where things are very unstable. The new hierarchy is difficult to work with. He doesn't get the players in that he wants. The pressure from the fans is crazy. And all of a sudden, this is not really the kind of move that he was envisaging. So we're going to leave it there for now. I've been rambling on for way too long, and it hasn't really been a structured podcast, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted to get my thoughts, out there and just kind of see what you guys are thinking about. What do you think about this move for Rhulani Mokwena? Is it a good move? Do you agree that going to Wydad was the right decision for him? Do you think he should have waited a bit? Do you think he should have went to another club? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'm going to be sure to reply to them because this is absolutely fascinating. But what's for sure is that we're all going to be paying attention to Wydad next year. I'll definitely be covering it on the African Five-A-Side podcast. So thanks for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts below, and we'll speak again soon. Take care. Peace.